Chapter 3. Pure Intentions Distorted. Feminist groups explicitly organize local action, including education and legislation, that promotes equality or equal opportunity for women. Gender equality is an essential human right for women to develop and live with dignity, freedom, justice, and peace, which declares that all women deserve to be treated fairly. In the last 2 decades, better access to education, politics, and technology has helped some women join traditionally male-dominated spaces. Society has become somewhat fairer, but there is more action that can take place. Women are still facing discrimination, and it is possible to achieve gender equality without abandoning all traditional roles. With a patriarchal system, the youth are questioning traditional gender roles since there have been changes in partnership perspectives. Since women's rights, feminist groups and discrimination in the workplace have helped women keep jobs and increase pay. Women ought to use caution when looking for an eternal mate, because you can't tell whether you're dating a man who doesn't support women having rights. Although God created men first in His image, He made man a representative of the entire human race. But sexism limits the development of specific human rights. The formation of sexism holds some men back and discriminates and oppresses women. The traditional models are upheld by coercion with attitudes, myths, and ethical values that hinder equal partnership with scrutinized backlashes. These men often become uncomfortable trying to upkeep all masculine roles and expectations, and they aren't experiencing certain forms of gender equality that women are experiencing either. Future actions would involve men sharing gender equality to bring women into equal partnership with men, which supports legal and social change, of which would enable men to get connected with their human essence, whereas they can claim true freedom of expression, which involves new social activities, judgment, and realization. Relationships built on lust, envy, and strife. To envy is to feel discontent with someone's advantage, success, possessions, etc. To lust is to have an intense sexual desire for an image or person that can become uncontrollable, and it can be the object of such feelings. Relationships don't form open conversations about the direction it is headed, or confirmed mutual agreements usually are built on lust, envy, and strife. It doesn't form a healthy environment for children, and this is where you will find most children suffering from calamity, including step-parenting relationships where the biological parent isn't present, in which a parent may set one child on a different platform than the others. When the child is set on a different platform and is used for uncontrollable sexual desires, it makes the other children feel less confident and connected to succeed in life. We don't have to pretend this doesn't happen, it happens all too often, but it is something that can be overcome with open conversation. There are good parenting books out there, and no parenting book will ever tell you to form lust, envy, or strife in a marriage or relationship to use children for sexual desires. No, not one. If you have felt uncontrollable sexual desires or discontent with another person's advantages, success, possessions, etc., seek help from a church congregation. However, they will want to see a change in your behavior, so wholeheartedly strive to change. If you are someone feeling these sexual desires, don't put the children in isolation, because it isn't healthy for anyone. Acts against women. Nowadays many authors write about abusing young women in crime fiction thriller novels. The various list ranges from being beaten, blinded, boiled, bound, buried alive, burned, eaten, gagged, imprisoned, raped, sliced, stabbed, starved, strung up to tied down, or even suffocated. Other acts against women include being drowned, forced into prostitution, pushed off a cliff, slipped a sex-drugged cocktail, or even used for one's sex slave. Only in a few cases does remaining quiet and submissive diminish control, and oppression syndrome affects women more than men. Women are noticing their ideas or memories of traditional roles have been distorted with reoccurring forms of manipulation. The Bible and history are a comparison to the hardship women will face if they don't remain quiet and submissive. The forceful show often comes directly and indirectly for women, and the occurrences never change due to the traditional gender roles. As a result, more are becoming less connected to righteousness and connected to self-righteousness. Too many people justify their wrong actions before the world, while violence against women and crime fiction thriller novels steadily increase. Did Al-Hakim Allah want women to have a voice? He wanted the innocent to receive justice, but this has very little to do with speaking out. While aggressive women use the quote, "do as I say not as I do," a submissive woman continues going through the oppression phases until things change for the better. Physical abuse in the presence of kids. Nowadays women have rights, but arguments are formed during uncertainty or a woman goes against a man's beliefs, in which physical abuse in the presence of kids or assaults against kids happens. Originally, it was believed that domestic violence only occurred with the poor and uneducated, but most relationships formed with violence don't make it to the marriage stages, and wealth isn't necessarily the common denominator. In some cases, a woman has had one man; in other cases, a woman has had multiple men or marriages. In some of those situations, when a woman was physically abused, the man has said, "We don't call the police, we will handle it ourselves." This shows cowardice when a man cannot use words of wisdom to resolve conflict. It isn't fair to the woman or kids if any are present visualizing the assault. Whether a boyfriend or husband, the violence often involved men who had mood swings, and some even threatened to kill the woman. There were times when a woman left their abuser, and then the man retaliated by killing them, and other women didn't leave for fear of the kids going without a father. Although some women don't value being defined by a man, if she has kids, they will want their father in their life. Victims in those situations became oppressed after the man maintained narcissistic control over them. After they left, the oppression formed into mental disorders. All this shows domestic violence has weakened support for an eternal marriage. Men with mood swings continue to impose violence against vulnerable women. There are vital steps men can take at every stage in life to prevent mood swings. Some steps include understanding what malnutrition is and isn't, making smart food choices, trying an oral supplement such as vitamin D3, brushing your teeth often, and consulting your healthcare provider. Also, soothing music can prevent depression phases for women in these situations. Having said that, many women may force men into relationships, but if more men used words of wisdom, fewer women would force relationships or end them. Set aside selfish pride when co-parenting, even if it weren't an abusive relationship. Keep in mind that the most important things in life involve embodying a loving and kind spirit with courage. A parent's first bond with their child. Creation between a father and mother is the first intimate part of forming a fetus. When the mother carries the fetus to term, this is the second intimate part of the formation and the first intimate part of bonding with the unborn fetus. The birth of an infant is the second intimate part of bonding after the mother carries the infant to term. Once the father and mother visualize their newborn baby, they give him or her a unique name, and then they fall in love with the baby. Breastfeeding is the third intimate part of bonding, an eternal bond both the baby and mother already share. Since those intimate parts help determine a father's guidance, the father ought to be present during formation, bonding, and if possible other stages. A father and mother generally desire a foundation where their children won't become a heavy burden. But, if a child and parent's purest intent gets distorted, it breaks the bond the parents and child had. More than anything in this world, they ought to desire to maintain that foundation. This requires fighting for their child when temptation comes their way, and if they weren't raised to, they need to be trained to do so. Otherwise, things can go downhill rather quickly. In a world where we have become unacceptable of eternal bonds between child and parents during pregnancy stages, it leaves less room for parents to honor lasting bonds. While it doesn't require money for parents to bond with their kids, society has created a social view that says, if you can't afford to have a child, you aren't the parent or you are not a good parent. This myth distorts fathers' and mothers' purest intent to create bonds that can last. This perspective needs a change to the old social views. Overcoming involves the world becoming acceptable once again of a poor parent's bond with their child. New slave woman versus bondwoman. A bondwoman is being created by mothers who limit drugs and violence from influencing their daughter's life. A slave woman is being created by mothers who beat and verbally curse their daughters around drugs and violence as if anything righteous will come out of living to die for these items, while it teaches them to accept drugs, violence, and other forms of enslavement. This occurs in homes where fathers and mothers are present, and more commonly in homes where mothers are present, and fathers are not. Just another reason more fathers ought to be present during their children's upbringing. A slave woman is being taught she doesn't need to overcome trauma as a child, while the bondwoman is being taught to overcome to reign victoriously. Broken spirits. Having kids and teens with a broken spirit means they have non-supportive parents, and there are several reasons why they have a broken spirit. One parent may have an addiction, a severe mental illness, and or a child molester may reside in the home or visit the home, in which kids and teens are often forced out for lack of finances and or physical, sexual, and verbal abuse. Teens are also forced out for breaking curfew and usage of alcohol or illicit drugs. Too many parents choose sinful sacrifices, and when the addictions are part of a tradition, they can be unbearable to live by. Relationship building starts at home with the adults around them, but once an adult has broken the trust, it can be difficult for the kids and teens to get back on track. Generally, after teens are forced out of the home, if it wasn't for church or college, they tend to lose hope. As a result, the sense of an emotional connection becomes non-existent because it requires practical formation. Some youth may avoid connecting with other family and friends, for fear of their trust being betrayed again. Not being able to connect in relationships decreases the probability of them being joined together as one with a spouse. While they won't be ready to emotionally connect, they may not even be ready for the world. A person's body, mood, and thoughts affect their willpower, and the motivation to achieve slowly diminishes after being traumatized. What they do with willpower thereafter can bring about more negative results. Forcing them out will only deter their personal beliefs, goals, self-value, and self-worth to the point of being influenced by anyone. The youth's spirits ordinarily get broken when they value willpower to overcome trial tests. The Bible teaches us to overcome the trial test, but it doesn't have references for forcing the youth out of the home. In Proverbs 22:6 it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Calamity and famine in sinful sacrifices, defiling flesh, drinking alcohol daily, dating random sexual partners, selling and smoking drugs, and the use of prescription drugs is at an all-time high. Random acts of violence go on daily, and many families have to move from place to place. Most of the lands in the U.S. are in a desolate state, which adds to the calamity and famine for the youth, in which they become victims of abandonment, abortion, born out of wedlock, taken away from birth fathers and/or mothers, and often are kidnapped, molested, murdered, neglected, and even tortured. Other youths become victims of homelessness, severe malnutrition, or starvation when they are all God's creations. Time after time, kids and teens visualize the promiscuous and selfish people in the world. Sinful sacrifices consume their lives, and then they drop out of high school. Many of them make depressive images in the mind because society generally feels justified in doing things crooked and perverted, so they become delusional about learning. In cases where the kids and teens suffer from one or two mental disorders, they have cursed or physically fought their parents. Typically, their dignity, responsibilities, and rights were denied for their sinful sacrifices. But naturally, the youth knew living a better quality of life could have helped them get on track for setting goals and reaching achievements. Yet many of them couldn't get their feet on solid ground to claim their mental clarity of innocence. Marriage is something to look forward to, it isn't something to hinder respect. For these and many other reasons, having kids by multiple men has led to disrespect for a father, and beating them with objects and cursing them has instilled hatred. As a result, they don't acknowledge becoming a living sacrifice as the first fruit for others who are lost in sin. They perceive acquiring blessings, gifts, honors, and rewards as requiring no living sacrifices. These are the majority reasons why the youth have a broken spirit and no respect for people of authority. Not enough parents admit the evil acts that took place against their youth during their upbringing. They rather send them away to a mental facility to avoid admitting fault, but mentally people don't get this way by themselves. Parents are hindering the youth, overlooking the negative situations, and the benefits of eternal life. Most parents look at their kids as though it is their fault, and the real stories need to be reproved. This only motivates the youth to make deals with the enemy and be lured by more sinful sacrifices, which are forms of enslavement, when they ought to be embodying an angelic personification, to receive blessings, honors, and rewards as a gift from God. Having said that, excessive acts and selfishness make families weak when our country should be making families stronger. Parents ought to be encouraging them to do homework to excel in school, which will allow them to grow in life. They ought to put faith in their youth when delivering righteous guidance while earning respect. The entire family could claim their direction, identity, and victory a lot faster. Isolating kids. Behavioral isolation refers to the many species that perform mating rituals differently, such as crickets only mate with males that produce a particular mating song. This is a common barrier between animals because these clues are ignored by species not accustomed to the ritual. The same concept applies to humans. Drittles only mate with other drittles. This is a major reason newcomers feel out of place in churches. While some parents isolate their kids for disciplinary actions, others isolate them to keep them from hanging with the wrong crowd or to keep them from having friends, period. However, not every parent isolates, and parents isolate for different reasons. Isolation is often used to segregate a group of people, and for some, it has been difficult to overcome. When you have been shut away from family and friends, you may experience feelings of anxiousness, depression, loneliness, withdrawals, etc. And your emotional connections may be replaced with fears. The youth have to build long-term emotional bonds. They need to be allowed to communicate and listen, to overcome. They have to be able to overcome the things that hold them back and avoid letting setbacks hinder their prayers or success. Also, they need to be allowed to put faith in God, because He has sees their struggles. So, if you aren't living a righteous lifestyle, you ought not to isolate kids because you will only hinder their growth. A child's devotion to their mother. Most children love their mother with a whole heart, regardless of forthcoming facts, and literally, she can do no wrong in their eyes. But once the children grow up and see the negative things their mother has done, it leaves them broken-hearted. They tend to wonder, why my mother isn't a forgiving and loving person? Why hasn't my mother made time for me? Why did my mother cheat outside the marriage? Too often, they wonder, has my mother ever been a righteous woman? Also, they tend to wonder, will she always be around? They are often broken-hearted with many questions that get answered promptly, but sometimes not at all. Life relates to the wind when the focus is away from God's word. Whichever way the wind blows, you tend to follow. After squandering opportunities, you create warfare between God and self. Although womankind is to look out for the structure of the home, as God intended. Just as kids start to lose faith in their mothers, women tend to lose respect for the Father in heaven for similar reasons. Once you lose faith in the Father, you won't acknowledge becoming transformed, as a part of His ministry. Devotion to either requires discipline and willpower to not conform to the things of this world. Mothers are to raise their kids in the direction they are to go, guiding and nurturing them. The kids ought to learn biblical values from mothers who know best what core values mean. Mothers aren't supposed to provoke them into enemy warfare or wrath. Kids exercising with mothers. God didn't intend for mothers to overlook their kids' health activities for vainness. Kids are whom mothers ought to be more concerned about, which is a step-by-step process. There are honorable characters kids can display without being vain. Nevertheless, a burden for some is losing weight that isn't getting enough exercise. Exercising together will enable them to stop consuming laziness as a destiny, and it will increase God's guidance in their life. After kids start to respect their birth mothers, God will relieve their heavy burdens and give them rest, leaving the kids an inheritance. Compared to the beginning of time, human life has revolutionized, yet still fewer actions and thoughts go into a child's future. The youth are seeking the opportunity for future education and marriage vows, or an inheritance or will, and not enough is being done about it. Some youths are being cut out of the will altogether. It doesn't make sense a woman works an entire lifetime, spends the extra finances on non-eternal things, and then isn't held accountable for leaving her kids an inheritance. This is another reason why kids have broken spirits. Too many parents are willing to force the sword on kids suffering through hardship, and it is all about the here and now. The government shouldn't have to step in on every aspect of a child's life. More adults ought to be willing to sacrifice the non-eternal things, to build an inheritance for their kids' future. But this seems to be an unfavorable topic to discuss while more youth suffer. The ones who suffer as kids are the same ones who suffer as adults, and it is rare for this not to happen. These topics will help form a better dialogue for women with kids to consider further options. Better communication skills. To communicate is the interchange of information, opinions, and thoughts, through signs, speeches, or writings. When you communicate, you engage in conversation or talk about something. Conversation requires skills such as patience, knowledge of grammar, willingness to listen and understand others, and either is the knowledge of one's ability. Bonds are what binds relationships together, such as an agreement or friendship. To communicate with a person or group, you put feelings, emotions, ideas, or thoughts together to form a relationship. Either way, you are to build up rather than tear down the bond of communication. There are many basic relationship networks for communication, such as partners, family, friends, social groups, workshops, and even public speaking as a world-class communicator. With family, you communicate sharing emotions, feelings, ideas, and thoughts to keep the family structure. With a partner, you communicate by sharing emotions, feelings, ideas, and thoughts to form companionship or marriage vows. With a friend, you communicate sharing experiences, feelings, ideas, and thoughts to form a friendship. In a group or workshop setting, you communicate by comparing ideas or thoughts to reach a goal or to complete an assignment. In a social group, You communicate by comparing experiences, ideas, and thoughts for a support system. In any of those relationship networks, your fellowship and shared attitudes, goals, and interests can form the community. A community is a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. Communication is an everyday necessity, whether you are face-to-face or on an electronic device. 20 signs of lack of emotional intelligence, EQ. 1. Avoiding direct contact. You hide behind technology and go out of your way to avoid facing the person that you want to contact. Or leave emails unanswered and avoid respecting them. But when you communicate, you have a lot to say that could be said in 2 sentences. 2. Avoiding conflict. You pretend certain disagreements didn't happen rather than just facing the conflict head-on. 3. Assuming malice. You often think others show intentional rudeness in their actions. Unless you know them to be rude people, just acknowledge that their actions may have been unconscious motives. 4. Communicating too narrowly. You withhold exposure that could broaden your relationship bonds, which limits the ability to align and solve problems, rather than communicating mistakes of growth and processes along the journey effectively. 5. Constantly interrupting. You don't wait for others to completely stop talking before interjecting and giving advice that is related to your past experiences. 6. Constantly repeating the same conversation. You often repeat things to memorize new information and better understand old information. Just another reason to level up your emotional intelligence, EQ. 7. Equating your experience. You tell long-winded tales of your experiences in similar situations, and often you just want to be admirable or show empathy rather than lending support. 8. Expecting top communication skills. You force everyone to be good communicators by telling fairy tale stories, rather than being honest about new strategies, strengths, weaknesses, or updates, or simply asking the questions that you need to ask. 9. Failure of weaker points. You avoid observing or pointing out red flags and opening the door when it is time to end conversations. Find out what isn't working, and either can be done without doing it abruptly. 10. Floundering. You ramble on endlessly without a significant point, rather than just being clear and concise. 11. Inconsistency. You often get lost in translation, and so you may assume things or remain in isolation when you aren't on the same page as others, rather than collaborating or empowering with organized, clear and concise communication. 12. Making too many assumptions. You talk around the group of people you are communicating with, rather than promoting understanding and finding common ground. Just simply articulate by executing, presenting, and proposing solutions. 13. Making excuses for your behavior with sentences such as, "It's just honesty, another person made me do it, another person made them feel this way, I am better than other people, it isn't as bad as other people, they have had it bad, or it is just who they are." 14. Multitasking. You multitask only when you want to ignore others or want them to know how important you are, rather than just giving them your undivided attention. 15. No communication strategy. You lack persistent engagement or interaction with others, and curbing confusion and opposition early in the process will improve your communication strategies. 16. Not listening enough. You don't acknowledge that everyone has diverse needs, and you avoid up-leveling your emotional intelligence, EQ, as a leader, and so you don't listen much. 17. Right message, wrong time. You try to convince your heart and spirit of something your mind knows is a lie. This was said by Shannon L. Alder. You become confused and then deliver a message early, which is supposed to have been delivered later, rather than acknowledging that patience is not an absence of action, but timing, and it waits on the right time to act, for the right principles. This was said by Fulton J. Sheen. 18. Poor choice of words. You choose words that don't explain the importance of things, rather than leveling up on English grammar. 19. Using filler words. You constantly use meaningless phrases, sounds, or words that mark a hesitation or pause in speech, such as at the end of the day, believe me, be that as it may, duh, I guess, I mean, I suppose, it is what it is, like, okay, or something, right, so be it, well, you know, you see, etc. 20. Using qualifiers. You constantly exaggerate conversations, using phrases or words that will decrease or increase the validity of certain situations or things. 21. Waiting instead of listening. You engage and wait but avoid listening. Clear advice over validation. Giving advice is an opinion or recommendation offered as a guide to moral action or conduct. To give pure advice, you give it clearly, without intent or malice. Validation is an approval, compliment, or confirmation that can be given or received. When giving validation, it is desired and deserving. When receiving validation, it is to be appreciated, but neither has to be done with force. Some people hide behind fear with cowardice, evasiveness, or indecisiveness. Others don't want to hear the negative results or rather not appeal to a list of commands. I hear people often repeating the quote, "Keep it 100," when no one does. This reveals an unsubmissive nature, but more people ought to take a step back to form better bonds and communication skills. If you are giving advice, clear advice works over validation, and if more people gave clear advice, validation wouldn't necessarily be needed. When social trends change to new perspectives, it doesn't mean views will be honorable for everyone. All this leaves less time to be open-minded and willing to accept constructive criticism. You ought to be willing to learn from your mistakes, but this involves acknowledging when you have made them. You can't be on the defense every time someone judges you. So, judge with a righteous judgment just as Al-Hakim Allah would have done, and avoid playing the bully roles conventional criticism often imposes on victims. Who is my neighbor? It is a person who shows mercy upon you. Reflections that talk about a brother and neighbor in comparison to strengthening bonds of communication and showing compassion for others within communities are vital. Typically, if you forgive less, you are loveless. To love, you need to be in a forgiving mood, and to forgive, you need to be in a loving mood. If you don't love yourself, you won't love the neighbors. It is possible to spot evildoers and take a stand for what is right, and stop promoting getting off the hook, to feel justified about things of no significant value. This is when you use your best energy. Repent, have faith, and believe in Allah to inherit eternal life. Whether or not you are enslaved to selfless pride, trust in Him. He is your brother and neighbor in the spirit of love, peace, joy, and happiness. Once you believe in Him and accept His atonement, you can be saved. Adult to adult teens righteous conversation. Teens learn interpersonal skills in school. They also acknowledge whether their parents are righteous conversationalists. If you gossip or trash talk, normally it will be difficult for them to allow you to lead in conversations without continually interrupting you before finishing. A list of things not to do. 1. Compete while talking by gossiping and trash talking. 2. Get too personal, and don't leave space for an exit during conversations. 3. Start long controlling conversations, and don't allow them to finish the thought process. 4. Give selfish opinions. 5. Hog the spotlight. 6. Not a full observer of the law. 7. Interrogation. 8. Unwilling to share positive thoughts. 9. Don't acknowledge them as conversational partners during conversations. Modifying conversations with teens. First and foremost, strive to become a full observer of the law, and avoid leading your teens into breaking laws. They learn what an observer of the law is in school. To avoid starting long conversations that will lead to an interrogation of their character. Only use interrogation when you are concerned about a child molester luring them, and when determining whether to contact local authorities. Give them time to finish the thought process of what you have first said, before speaking, and always give them space and time to exit the conversations. Be willing to share your positive thoughts without backlash and avoid competing with them or giving selfish opinions. Remember, they will only benefit from a person giving them clear advice, not validation. To stop hogging conversations with your teens, acknowledge them as a conversational partner, bypassing leadership during conversations promptly. It isn't all about what you want from a conversation, but more about what they can achieve from having the conversation itself. Communication without anger. Use the available time to exercise self-awareness, make clear sense with actions. The things you can't control, just let them go, long as it's not harming innocent people's lives. Avoid becoming humiliated or overwhelmed with others. Remember to relax, and communication is the key. Improving family communication. Healthy and productive. Communication is essential for families because of the intimacy levels. Regular talks about development, process, and progress are topics that can make you appreciate the family structure and want to improve it. Family communication styles are what sets the tone for interactions with others outside the family, such as future relationships, schoolmates, society, or even the workplace. Creating opportunities to effectively talk, insisting on healthy meals, finding out the highs and lows, date night with your kids, using the 80-20th second listening rule, using technology to the family's advantage, and creating your righteous family traditions can help to increase communication productivity in relationships. Why does PAAD help children and their children? A biological parent can take their grandkids out of the home if they can prove the neglect with the court's permission. However, adopted and step-parents tend to use various reasons such as an income or to add to an income when those aren't significant reasons for taking kids out of a home. Too often it is done without the court's permission, and anyone inside or outside the family can endanger their lives. If it is without the court's permission, it is committing fraud even when taking them out of state where they weren't born. Non-supportive parents, whether adopted, biological, or step-parents, tend to take their children for granted when they haven't raised them with ethical values. Without God's guidance and an acknowledgement of prayer, the next generation is too raised without ethical values. This could violate their rights and responsibilities. The neglect ought to be proven. If you can't prove in court the reason for taking the kids out of the home, it is best to let them remain with their birth fathers and mothers. The new generation ought to have an advantage over the prior generation, due to better housing and work advancements, which makes it possible to acquire better transportation to attend church regularly. So much of this is going on, and very little is said about grandparents caring for grandkids, when they ought to be enjoying life to the fullest after retirement. Parents who pray for their kids don't have to worry about how they take care of their kids. If you don't acknowledge the Spirit of God answering prayers, why tell your kids to do right by the Father in heaven? With unbelief in God on the rise, there wouldn't be obstacles to overcome, righteous judgment, honors, or victories. Prayers open doors. It is the first acknowledgement of the needs. In a world where things aren't promised to anyone, it is a must. How trusting God's message can work for your family. Through God's grace, message, and signs you can trust that He had your best interest at heart when He was raised from birth. When you apply biblical truths to God's commands, you can build a quality structure of the home for your kids. After that, through God's gift, you can teach them honorable characteristics, such as obedience to God's commands, avoidance of hindering their prayers, honorable of traditional marriages and keeping themselves pure until marriage, observant and sensitivity to leadership, respect authority figures, contemplative to get current results, a law-abiding citizen, hardworking and courage to reach the lost. These are just a few honorable characters kids can model. Once parents are accepting of their bonds of communication with family and friends, they can create lasting relationships. All this to say most broken relationships adults experience come from not having supportive parents. When parents are supportive of their kids having friends, more likely the kids can create better bonds that will last. When they aren't supportive, kids tend to not be supportive of them having friends either. For reference, more characters kids can model. Read God's message. It can help form all alike leadership in all of womankind. Yield to authority figures. Usually parents teach their kids to respect authority while they're toddlers. This is when toddlers are ready to embrace growth and knowledge. When parents hold back the basic tools of life, they don't want to acknowledge them during their teens. Sympathetically, you can tell them that it is okay to yield to authorities.